In this video, I'm going to provide you with a complete guide to the GoPro Hero 13 Black. I'm also going to provide you with many tips, tricks, and some secrets you'll not want to miss. I've owned and extensively used every GoPro action camera for the last 10 years now, and I have a lot of experience with figuring out how to get the best results with these cameras. And since this will be a lengthy video with a lot of content, I've created a table of contents below so that you can easily navigate through this content. So the first thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to unbox the Hero 13 Black, and we're going to look at the hardware and what each button on the camera does. And then I'm going to dive into the different modes and best settings so that I can fully equip you to get the very best footage from the Hero 13 Black. So first things first, we need to unbox this camera. So in order to unbox this, we're just gonna rip open this tab here on the bottom. And GoPro has chosen to use the foam tray again. I do kind of miss the zippered case they included with the Hero 10, I believe. So inside we've got some basic instructions, including your camera must be updated before you can use it. I'm going to go through that. It's got the instructions inside here. Then a note about subscribing, some stickers, pro tips for best cold weather performance, if you have product questions. And then in here we have the camera. We have a USB-C to USB-C cable. We have a curved adhesive mount. We have the thumb screw down in here, if I can get it out. My fingers are too big to get it there. Basic thumb screw. And then right under here is the battery. Now, if you do own an older GoPro, do note that the battery with the Hero 13 will not work with those GoPros, and any battery from those GoPros will not work with the Hero 13. And then underneath here is the standard GoPro mount. So in case you're wondering how to get this mount in, all you do is lift this rubber piece and you pop it into place and then push the rubber piece back in there. Then if you want to remove it, same thing, lift the rubber and you can squeeze these together and push it back through. And then of course, right here, we have the Hero 13 Black. And again, GoPro makes sure you understand that you must update it before you can use it. First of all, we've got the shutter button right here on top. This is the button you hit to start and stop recording. And over here on the side, we have the door. This is where you would insert the battery as well as the MicroSD card right here. So I'm going to do that right now. And when inserting the battery, just make sure these contacts right here line up with those contacts down in there. So you're going to put it in just like this. And then for the MicroSD card, let me grab that. When inserting the MicroSD card, you're going to have the text face toward the battery right here. And then you're just going to pop it down into place. And once it's clicked into place, it's going to be nice and flush there. And you're good to close the door at that point. For your microSD card, you'll want a brand name microSD card that meets the following requirements. It needs to be rated class A2, V30, UHS 3, or higher. GoPro does provide a list of recommended microSD cards on their website, and GoPro does regularly update that list. I personally like to use the SanDisk Extreme Pro in the 512GB size. I've had a great experience with this specific card, but there are many other cards that GoPro has on the recommended list. So by no means are you limited to this card. You have a lot of other options. Now, the thing I'd like to mention about the door here is this is the stock door that comes with the GoPro. GoPro does have an optional accessory door, and that is called the Contacto magnetic door. And if you want to buy that, all you have to do is pop off this door to put that on. And the way you pop it off is you open it, and then you pull up gently like that. And it's going to pop off right here. And then to get it back on, you just need to make sure you line up this part right here with this rod, and it's going to pop back into place. And if you do own the GoPro Hero pass-through door for the 10, the 11, or the 12, that will work on here as well. I'm personally planning to use the pass-through door on mine. And going around to the front of the camera, right here is the status light. And of course, right here is the removable lens. If you do have ND filters or other filters, in order to remove this, all you do is lift slightly and twist, either left or right, and it's going to pop off. And then when you want to put it back on, just put it back at an angle and then twist again, either left or right, and it's going to pop back into place. And of course, this is the front screen right here, and this is the rear screen right here. And in case you're wondering where the microphone is right here. It's that little dot right there in the middle of the heatsink. I'm hoping that heatsink helps the Hero 13 run even cooler. Time will tell. And going around to the side here, this button right here is the mode button, and it's also the power button. So this is how you turn your GoPro off and on. Just hold in on it. Then when you want to switch modes, you just tap this button, and it's going to toggle between video, time-lapse, and photo mode. And in case you're wondering what this is down here, this is the drain microphone. So if you use this in the water, this is where the water is going to drain out, right here. You don't want to try to open this because it's not a door or latch. And down here underneath, there's a speaker. The speaker is right under here. So if you're playing back any clips on the camera, that's where the sound is originating. Then of course, on the Hero 13, we do still have the 1/4-20 mounting thread, which is great. You can mount this on tripods, and it's really handy to have built onto theirs, so you don't have to use a thumb screw and mount if you don't want to. And then this is also where you can connect the magnetic latch mount, which is brand new with the Hero 13. It does not ship with the kit. It is an optional accessory that you have to purchase. That is where you attach the magnetic latch mount. And when you do want to mount your GoPro to a mount like this, all you have to do is pull down the feet, and then you're going to place it on here, line it up, and then the thumb screw is going to go through right here. Then once you've done that, it's going to be nicely mounted there. Then when you want to unmount it, just unscrew and take it back off. Now let's power on the GoPro for the first time. And first step is we're going to select our language and legal stuff. I'm going to agree. GPS, I'm going to turn that on in case I want that data. Voice control, I'm going to keep that off for now. I don't use voice control. We'll talk about that more later. Next step, we need to scan QR code on our phone, and we're going to open that in the GoPro Quik app, and we're going to pair the camera. So it's going to connect there. And then what we're going to see in the Quik app is we're going to see it connected. It's going to say camera found. And it's going to say firmware update is required. So I'm going to click install update. And this, of course, is the out-of-box brand new firmware update. I'm going to accept and continue. And then it's going to connect to the camera, and it's going to offer the Wi-Fi connection in a moment here. We're going to click join, right? And then it's going to start with the update process. Generally, this is going to take a couple minutes. Sometimes some of the firmware updates can take a little bit longer, but the percentage is counting up pretty quickly right now. And on the actual GoPro, you're going to see the downloading update message. It's going to tell you to keep your camera plugged in and connected to power. All right. And now it's installing the update. And now the GoPro shows updating, and it shows the spinning cog there now. Then I think it's going to do a reboot here soon. And there are times where you may feel like it's not really doing something. That's how I feel when the update runs for a really long time like this, but trust me, it is. And it can take a couple minutes sometimes. All right, we got our reboot there, and we have the update complete message. And then next, your app is going to show that message in a moment. The Quik app is. It is worth noting you will need that Quik app installed for the first time activation. That will be necessary. All right, update complete. We are good to go. Here's how to use the rear touchscreen. So first of all, if you tap, it's going to bring up all of the options here. And then if you tap again, it's going to take them away. If you swipe left or right, this is going to toggle between the 3 different modes. So you have time-lapse, video, and photo mode. And if you swipe down from the top, this is where you're going to get to your dashboard and all of your other preferences and settings. And if you swipe up from the bottom, this is where you're going to see any media that you've recorded. And that media is going to default to the last clip or photo that you recorded. And you, of course, can toggle through them. Right now, I don't have any media because I haven't done any recording yet with this camera. There's also a function if you press and hold on the screen that we're going to talk about a little bit later. That is one of those lesser known functions, but it's very powerful. It's something you'll definitely want to know. Next, we're going to explore the general menu and all the settings that you'll want to configure in order to get the very best from your Hero 13. So we're going to swipe down, and the first one here is voice control. So if you want to use voice control, you can turn that on and voice control on. And the next button here is your camera beeps. If you don't want to hear the beeps, you can turn it off entirely. Now we'll be able to fine tune those a little bit later. So for now, I'm going to keep it at high. Next is the screensaver. So you can turn it off or on. I do want it on, but there's also going to be a setting where we can adjust that as well. And right here is the screen lock. So if you want to lock this, like if you're going to be underwater or you're controlling it with your phone through the Quik app, you can do that. That way, if something hits the screen here, it's not going to accidentally do something you don't want it to do. But I'm going to turn the screen lock off for now. Down here is the front screen settings. So the front display, you can either have screen off, status only, actual screen, or full screen. I like to do full screen because I like to see everything on that front screen. So I'm going to select that option. Next one is the orientation lock. So you can lock it so that it stays oriented the same way at all times. I like to do that. I don't want to switch the vertical and horizontal on me. Next is the LEDs. I definitely want the LEDs on. I like having those status lights to know what's going on in my camera. So I'm going to keep that on. And finally, down here, so if you're using any of the lens mods, it's going to automatically detect these if you keep it on auto detect. So if you have the brand new ND filters from GoPro, the ultra wide lens, the macro lens, any of those, it's going to detect them right here. So I like to keep that to auto detect. So next, if we toggle to the right, this is where you're going to see your MicroSD card status, which right now it's completely empty. It does confirm that I have the 512 gigabyte card in there. And then this is also where you can set up your cloud upload. So if you are a GoPro subscriber, you can set it up and it's going to upload your content automatically. And there's not going to be any additional cost or limits with that. If you have the premium plan, you can upload an unlimited amount in full resolution. Next, we're going to swipe left and it's going to bring up the third screen here. So this is where it's going to tell you if it's paired with the Quik app. It's going to tell you what's paired via Bluetooth. That's the only thing I have paired currently. If you were to pair a remote via Bluetooth, it's going to show that there as well. And then the setting here where it says controls easy, I'm going to change this to Pro because this provides full control of all settings. And I definitely recommend doing that. It's going to help you get the most out of this camera. And then preferences over here, I'm going to click on that. This is where we're going to have a bunch of options on this screen. So first of all, if you want to set up the cloud upload and have it auto upload, you would do so right here. When you click on that, it's going to give you a QR code you can scan, and it's going to take you to the Quik app to do that. For the wireless connections, I usually just leave this alone and keep the defaults. I keep it on, and I keep it set to the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. 5 gigahertz is great as long as your phone supports that, but if you have an older phone or one that doesn't, you'd want to change it to 2.4. Let's go to the general menu next. Under the general menu, Quick Capture, that option basically enables you to hit the record button to power on your GoPro and immediately start recording. I like doing that. I like having that option there. So if you do that, you also can set the default preset. I like to have last used video because most of the time I'm going to be doing video with my GoPro, but you also can change it to last used photo or last used time lapse or just last used. For the auto power off, the default is 5 minutes. I like to keep it at that. That means if your GoPro is on for 5 minutes and you do nothing with it at all, it's going to power off after 5 minutes of inactivity. That can be great for saving battery. For the LEDs, I like to have all on. GPS here, if you're going to use GPS, you can have that on. It's going to give you a lot of useful speed and location data if you want to superimpose it later on for a project or an adventure. I'm going to turn it off because presently I don't have plans to use it. And if you have it on but you're not using it, it's going to use more battery and potentially make your camera a little bit hotter. So if you're not going to use it, I recommend turning it off entirely. You want to make sure the language under voice control is set to your language. And then for the commands, this is a list. So there's a nice little list here. What I recommend doing is I recommend taking a photo of that list. That way you can easily access it on your phone. So I took a photo there. Next, we're going to go down here to audio. Under audio, for the camera volume, I'm going to set it to medium. I find that the high is way too loud, especially if you're around a lot of other people. It does not make this camera very discreet. So I like to do medium or low. And the external mic option, it's going to say NA because I don't have an external mic connected right now. But if I did have one connected, it's going to offer some different options. And anytime you have an external mic connected, it is going to show an audio meter on screen, which is very helpful. Next, we have the displays option. So this is where you can change your screensaver. This is how quickly it will come on. Even if you're recording, your screen will go black, which if you don't expect that, that can be a little disconcerting. But that's basically just to save battery life because your screen is one of the biggest sources of battery power being consumed. I like to do 2 minutes on this. I find the 1 is a little bit too fast, but the 2 is just right. For the brightness, the default is 50%. If you're good with 50, that's fine. But if you want it really bright, so you can see everything, you can go all the way up to 100. And you can go all the way down to basically 0. You can go to 10%. I usually like to stick with anywhere between 50 and 80. I find that works well. And the grid, I like to have the grid on. It's going to give you your thirds on the screen, and I find that can be really helpful. And down here we have our date and time. That is going to set through the app when you pair it. So generally I find I don't need to change that or adjust it on here. And then for regional, you just want to make sure this is set to the regional format for your country. In my case, I'm in the United States, so I have it set to 60 Hertz. But if you're in a country with 50 Hertz, you'll want to make sure you change it to the 50 Hertz. Then if you go down here to About, you're going to see there's a GoPro Updates tab. You can tap that. It's going to give you the QR code to scan. Camera info, that's going to have your camera name, your serial number, and your version number, firmware. And then down here, there's a nice little battery info tab, which is great. It shows you the battery health, and it also shows you the battery type, and it confirms that it's compatible. Now, this could be especially useful if you're using any type of third-party batteries, which I don't necessarily recommend doing. There are some good ones out there, but there's also some that can cause problems like overheating or other issues with your camera. Some of those can void warranty as well. And then down here at the very bottom, the reset option, if you need to format your microSD card, you can select that. But it does warn you that if you do format it, it is going to delete all files on that card. So make sure you have everything backed up first before you do so. And a helpful tip and trick with your microSD card, I recommend formatting it at least once a month. Again, make sure you get everything off it first. But I find that helps prevent file corruption, and I find it helps the recording speed keep up well because your card's not too full. When your card gets really full, sometimes things can get kind of laggy there. And then if you ever have a time where you want to reset your presets, you would select this. If you want to reset the camera tips, you'll select that one. And then if you ever need to do a factory reset, you can click that right there at the bottom. Next, we're going to explore the best settings that I recommend for the video mode. And as I go through each of these, I'm going to show you how to modify and save a custom preset. On the Hero 13, you can now assign presets a custom name directly on the camera. Up here is the space left on your microSD card, and that's going to change depending on what mode you're in. Right now, it's kind of hard to see because of the color in the sky right here, but it says 2 hours, 32 minutes. This is the mode you're currently in, which is video. This is your battery percentage left, 81. This right here is hyper smooth, so you can do off, on, or auto boost. And do note that if you turn it to auto boost, there is going to be some cropping that occurs. I prefer keeping it set to just the standard of on. I find that works great for nearly all use cases. But if you're doing something where there's just a ton of movement, then you might want to do boost. And then down here is where you can control your lens width. So while we're here, let's talk about these. So the first thing you have is you have the hyper view, and it gives you a good description of what it's best to use that for. Do note that the hyper view is going to have a lot of distortion because the hyper view is taking that 8x7 nearly square frame and it's crushing it down like this, so it fills the entire screen. So it's pulling it left and right, and it's pulling it up and down. I don't find myself using Hyperview much, but it can be great if you want something that's really immersive. Superview is one that I like to use when I'm riding a bike or anytime I want a really wide perspective. Sometimes I use it for hiking as well, if I'm in an area where I really want that landscape around me to show. Wide is one of the ones I use most often. This one I find is great for a lot of those standard shots that I'm doing because there's not a ton of distortion with it, and it tends to look really good while still including enough of the environment around me. And then the next option is linear. So linear is going to be that wide field of view without the fisheye effect. That one is great for landscapes or anytime you want the lines to be straight. Like if you're in a city, you don't want the buildings to have that curve. It can be great for that. And then finally, the linear plus horizon lock. This one is probably the one that I use second most often to the wide. And the reason I use this is because in this mode, in certain resolutions and frame rates, you can rotate the camera 360 degrees and it's still going to keep the horizon locked. And you could even do that all the way up to 5.3K. This is the mode I recommend if you really want to get cinematic looking footage from your GoPro. This one right here is the best choice for that. Then if you click on this button over here, this is where you can do your framing. So this is your aspect ratio. So if you want widescreen 16:9, or you want vertical, if you want to shoot vertical natively on the camera, you can do that right there. You can do traditional, and traditional is going to be that 4:3 aspect ratio, which you can then drop that on a 16:9 timeline later, and it's going to automatically adjust to that. It's going to center it, but it does give you a little bit of vertical resolution to play with at the top and the bottom. And then up here, this is personally the one I work with most often. This is the full frame 8x7. So when you capture in this mode, you're using the entirety of the frame in the camera. And then that gives you flexibility later on to put it on 16:9, and you have a lot of room to work with to reframe it. So I personally like to use the 8x7. And then down here, when you click that, this is where you can change all of your specific parameters. So first of all, up here at the top, these are the color profiles. So standard just records video using the standard format, and this is a good one to use if you don't want to do any color grading later on, or you don't want HDR. If you want to do the HDR video, that high dynamic range right out of your camera for an HDR workflow, you want to make sure to select that. When you click on log, it's going to of course show you what I was about to say. But if you choose log, it's going to give you that very washed out looking footage. And that's because it's going to capture a lot of detail, and it's going to let you choose what detail to bring out later on when you edit that footage. So it's good if you want to do a lot of color grading. It's going to be perfect for that. I often like to use log because I like to do the grading later on. I feel like it helps me get the very best out of my GoPro footage. And then next is where you can choose your framing. So depending on what you select at the top, you're going to have different framing options. If you select standard, you're going to have 4 options here. If you select HDR, you're going to have 2. And if you select log, you're also going to have 2. So I'm going to select 8x7. And when possible, for the resolution, I recommend using 5.3K. And the reason for that is 5.3K technically is about 91% more resolution than 4K. So you're getting a lot more detail and resolution there in footage. Even though 4K is great, if you do 5.3K and then put it on a 4K timeline, your footage is going to look extra good. So what you'll see here is you'll see different options that are grayed out depending on what mode you select. So if you want to do 5.3K 60, you'll have to select 16:9 here, and then that becomes available. But if you do the 8x7 like I'm doing, you can only do up to 5.3K 30. But then if you drop to 4K with the 8x7, then you can do 4K 60. So you'll definitely want to play around with these. I often do like to record in 5.3K 60, which I'm going to save a preset for. So when I do that preset, I'm going to have to do 16:9. And then down here, I'm going to do the digital lens linear plus horizon leveling for this mode. This is actually going to be my basic slow motion mode. And this is going to be for that cinematic looking footage. And I'm going to keep hypersmooth turned on. And then down here under the captured option, if you want to do scheduled capture, right here is where you can turn it on. This basically is going to tell your GoPro to power on at a certain time that you can schedule ahead of time. I don't find I use that because I just don't really have use cases for it. But if you do, that's how you would do it. For the duration, if you ever want to set a limit on the duration of recording, this is where you would set it. I do not want to set a duration, so I'm doing no limit. Hindsight feature, let's talk about that for a moment. So if you turn on hindsight, you can do 15 seconds or 30 seconds. And basically what happens is you could be in an event. Let's say you're at a sporting event and you're waiting for something exciting to happen. If you have hindsight turned on, something exciting can happen, and then you can hit the record button right away. And it's going to start those 30 seconds before that happened. So basically what your GoPro is doing is it's watching at all times, and it is recording, but it's not really recording. It's basically temporarily recording. And this is great if you don't want to keep your camera rolling the whole time and then have to go back and find those few key plays out of an hour or two of footage. You can use hindsight. It'll save you a lot of time later on, and it'll save you a lot of microSD card space. So I definitely recommend doing it for something like that. It's also great for fishing videos, anything where most of the time you're not going to want the footage, but you're just going to want a few key moments from whatever's happening. I was hoping a bear would run by right here, while I'm doing that, so then I could give you a demonstration of hindsight, but alas, that did not happen. And then if you want to do a timer where you have a timer set before you hit the shutter button to record, you can do the timer. I find I don't typically use that, but that can be a feature that's great later on in a night lapse mode, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then zoom, if you want to do zoom, you can use this right here, but I do not recommend that because when you do that, it's a digital zoom and it's zooming in and you're losing resolution. Therefore, if you want to zoom on anything later on when editing, I recommend just doing that when you're editing. All right, the next settings here, bit depth. That is grayed out currently because of the mode I'm in, and that is set to 10-bit. You definitely want 10-bit. 10-bit is more than a billion with a B, different color shades. But if you do 8-bit video, that's only going to be 16 million possible colors. So 10-bit looks a lot better, especially if you're doing a video of the sky or anything like that. If you have 8-bit, it's going to show banding in the sky, but with 10-bit, the transition of different colors in the sky is going to look really smooth. For bitrate, you definitely want high. It's going to give you that 120 megabits per second video, and it's going to look really good. Now, how you set these settings here is going to depend on a lot of different factors. And if you're using ND filters, or if you're using a gimbal, something like that, then you're probably going to set your shutter to a manual value here. So that is worth noting. But if you're not using any of those filters, then I recommend keeping shutter speed set to auto. Your GoPro is going to do a good job of adjusting that automatically. For the EV comp, I usually like to keep this at -0.5. That helps preserve a little more detail in those highlights, such as clouds and anything that's bright. And then if I need to bump up the exposure a little bit later on, I can easily do that when editing. For the white balance, if I'm outside during the daytime, I like to keep this set at 5500K. If it is sunrise or sunset, I like 6500K. And then if it's nighttime, I like 3200K to about 4000K. But I'm going to leave this at 5500K because that's the one I'm going to be using most of the time. For the ISO min, I like to keep that at 100. And the ISO max, I like to put that up to 800. I don't like the ISO max to go over 800 because it introduces a lot of noise and grain into the footage, and it's not great. But speaking of noise, we're going to have a denoise setting, and that's one of the things that's brand new to the GoPro Hero 13. That option was not available on the 12 without running GoPro Lapse firmware. So I like that GoPro has taken some of the features from that firmware and integrated them into the stock firmware. For sharpness, I usually like to keep this at low or medium. If you're not going to edit later on, I recommend putting it to medium, but I don't recommend ever doing high. High is way too sharp and it does not look good. But medium can be great if you're not going to edit later on. But if you do low and you're going to edit later on, you can always add a little bit of sharpness back. So I like to keep it at low. That way I have maximum control over that later on. If you keep the denoise set to high, then with the ISO values, you can take that ISO up to about 1600 or even 3200 and potentially still get good footage. But usually when I keep the ISO at 800 max, I like to put the denoise down to medium or low. And the medium or low is also great if you have a denoise plugin that you're going to use when editing later on, which if you have DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, or Premiere Pro, there are a lot of plugins you can use in there to do your own denoising, and it can often do a better job than the GoPro can do in body. Sometimes too much denoising in the GoPro can give that blocky look to the footage and it doesn't look great. So you'll want to adjust that accordingly based on that. And then the color down here, of course, is GPU log because I'm in that log mode. And then down here, let's talk about the audio settings. So for the raw audio, you've got a couple different options here. If you want a raw audio track, you can do low. It's going to create a raw audio track with minimal processing. Medium, it's going to be moderate processing. And high, it's going to be full processing. So for the audio tuning, standard is the default option. Tunes the audio recording to capture balanced, true-to-life sound. That's great for most shots. But if you are doing a lot of talking, like if you're vlogging with your camera, I highly recommend doing the voice option here. And what it does is it focuses on the voice. And what it does is it kind of minimizes the ambient sounds around you. It doesn't get rid of them entirely, but it does minimize them, which can be very helpful, especially if you're in a noisy place. We have got some serious wind and some very fast moving clouds up here. It's a lot of fun. This was a really beautiful day to hike today. And it's so nice. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, but it's perfect. Wind reduction, you've got a couple options here. But most of the time, I just keep it here set to auto, and I don't really have any problems. And then finally, if you're using an external mic with the media mod, this is where you can enable that. So right now I don't have the media mod on here. It's the standard GoPro, but if you are, that's where you can do it. And then if you want to adjust any of the shortcuts on your main screen, if you want to change them at all, this is where you can do that. You can click on these and it's going to let you select your different options and where you want to place them. I usually like to stick with the defaults there, so I'm going to keep them as they are. But now that I have this mode set up, I'm going to toggle up, check all of my settings, log, 16:9, 5.3K, 60, linear plus horizon leveling, hyper smooth on, and then all of these other settings are keyed in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this as a preset. So I'm going to click Save As, and for this one, I'm going to save it as slow-mo because it's 5.3K 60, and it allows me to slow it down by 50% later on. This is going to be my basic slow-mo mode. So I've got it saved right there. Now if we click, we're going to see some of these other presets that are already saved here. So what I want to do next is I want to go here and configure this one, and I want to make this one my standard 5.3K 24 option. This would be for anything I don't want to slow down later on, and I'm going to stick with the wide lens because that's the only option available when you're doing 8x7 5.3K 24. If I changed it to 16:9, then you would see all of the digital lens options available there again. Hyper smooth on and bitrate high, making auto shutter. We're going to keep all these other settings the same, and then I don't have to do any saving here because I changed it within the preset that already existed. So now if we go back and look, it saved all of my settings that I just keyed in right there. Now something that's new on the GoPro Hero 13 is there is a new burst slow-mo mode. And what this mode does is it lets you capture 5.3K 120. On the Hero 12 and before, you could only do up to 4K 120. So this gives you 91% higher resolution. But the trick is you can only do it for 5 seconds. And you, of course, can do 900p at 360 frames, or you can do 720p at 400. Now, those are much lower resolutions. I don't personally use those, but the 5.3K 120, I do use that. Bitrate, we're going to put that to high. Shutter auto. EV comp -0.5, white balance 5500K, ISO minimum 100, ISO max 800, sharpness low, and denoise low. And then color, I'm going to do natural for that. It is worth noting that you cannot do the log mode in this mode. You do have to stick with one of the color profiles available on here, which in this case, natural is my favorite. So we have that mode set up now as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a new preset. So we're going to go here, we're going to click video, and for this preset, let's do an HDR one. So we're going to do HDR 16:9, and we're going to do 5.3K 24. We're going to do linear plus horizon leveling, hyper smooth on, and this is brand new to the GoPro as well, that HLG HDR. I highly recommend using this if you're going to do HDR. What this does is this is a true HDR. The standard HDR before was not. This actually gives you that full color spectrum for true HDR. So if you want to create some really high quality HDR content, this is how you would do it. And bitrate, definitely put that to high. A lot of these settings are going to be grayed out because of the nature of HDR. You're not going to be able to control those, which is fine. The camera does a great job with that. For the white balance, to 5500K. And sharpness, I recommend putting that to low. It's going to give you the best look. For denoise, I recommend putting that at medium. Color, I recommend sticking with natural. And then on the Hero 13, you can now create a custom name for your preset as well. So I'm going to click that, and you can start typing letters. So very cool. I'm going to be very creative and call it HLG HDR, and then I'm going to click save. So now if we go and look at our list of presets, you'll see that one right there, slow-mo, video, burst slow-mo. So before we leave video mode, I want to show you one of those features that I was alluding to earlier that doesn't really get talked about much. I don't know how many people know it exists, so I definitely want to show you. And that feature is called exposure control. So by default, your GoPro uses the entire frame to determine an average exposure for your entire frame. But let's say there's a part of your frame where you want to have it exposed separately, where you want to have the exposure prioritized. A good example, if you're snowboarding on a sunny day, you might want to try locking the exposure on the jacket of your subject instead of the sky, because it's going to make your subject look really dark when it's trying to expose for the sky properly. It's going to darken the rest of the frame, especially if it's a bright day with a lot of snow. So what you do for exposure control is you tap on the screen and hold down. You're going to get this box that shows up, and you want to drag this around to whatever part of your frame you want prioritized. So Let's say in this case, we want this bonfire pit prioritized. Once we have selected it, we'll hit the check mark and it's going to stay on that part of the frame. And furthermore, if you want to adjust the exposure compensation, you can tap on this and you can adjust that even further. So let's say this part of your frame is particularly dark that you're selecting and you want to boost the exposure a little bit. It's going to expose some other parts of your frame, like the sky, for instance, but that may not be a big deal depending on how you're filming, because it's more important to have your subject properly exposed. At the same time, you also can underexpose. So if the subject you want to expose properly is very bright, you can underexpose this here as well. So it's very useful for that. I definitely recommend playing around with this feature because you can really get some excellent results. And when you move your GoPro around, whatever part of the frame this is in, the part of the frame is going to continue to be prioritized. And then once you have it set, you can start recording and it's going to record with that part of the frame prioritized. And however you set the exposure control, that's going to stay until you restart your camera. But if you want to take it away, just click on the box and it's going to clear it. Easy as that. Next, let's talk about the time-lapse best settings. So we're going to toggle left, and under time-lapse mode, there's going to be a few different modes to set here. If you click on the list, you're going to see time warp, star trails, light painting, vehicle lights, time-lapse, and night lapse. Start with time warp here first. This basically lets you capture really smooth time-lapse footage while you're on the move. So this is great for any of those shots where you're moving along and you want to show the passage of time while you're moving. So for this mode, I generally like to keep it at 16:9, but if you are doing a vertical video, like for a YouTube short or Instagram, anything like that, you can do 9:16, or you can do 8:7 as well if you just want to reframe later on. It's great for that as well. I typically like to do 8:7 here because then I'm getting the full sensor readout. I like to do 5.3K, and of course, the only option for that is the wide lens. And then EV comp, I like to keep this at -0.5. White balance, I like to set that to a static value, 5500K. ISO min 100. ISO max 800. Sharpness low. And denoise, again, that's going to depend on if you're going to do any denoising later on, or if you're going to use a higher ISO, I'm going to keep that set to low. Color, I like to use natural for this. I find that comes out well. And then one of the most important parts of this is the speed. You can do 2 times all the way up to 30 times the speed. And down here, it's going to tell you what each of those equals. If you did 30 times, you would have to record for 15 minutes to get 10 seconds of time warp later on. But if you do 2 times down here, you'd record 1 minute to get 30 seconds. I usually just keep this at auto. I find auto works really well. And star trails, let's talk about star trails. Star trails is very fun. It's one I love to use on here, and you can do it in camera, and it gets those cool star trails of the stars rotating in the sky. So for this one, I like to do 8:7 because I like to reframe later on, but if you don't want to edit at all, do 16:9. And then 5.3K, I want the highest resolution. For the trail length, it does give you examples here, so you can select what you would like to see. That's if you select long, right there. If you select short, that's what it's going to look like right there. And then if you select max, that's what it's going to look like. I love all of these, but I think my favorite is long. I kind of like that middle of the road. I find that works best. If you have a really dark sky, keep it set to shutter of 30 seconds. If you're in somewhat of an urban area, I recommend doing 15 seconds. For the timer, the 3 seconds is good because when you hit the shutter button to start it, you want to make sure your camera's not moving because you'll want it on a tripod for the star trails. Then down here, a lot of these settings are going to be grayed out because these are the defaults for that. I do agree with 800 for the ISO min and max. I find that works best, so I keep it at that. And the denoise, it is a good idea to keep it at high because you are working with low light, and that denoise is going to help a lot. Next mode is light painting. So light painting is one of those very cool modes. You can use a long exposure and you can basically use a light and you can draw or write stuff in the dark and it's going to capture it. Stuff like glow sticks can work well for that too. I will admit this isn't a mode I use very often, but it's one I need to use more often. So I recommend 8:7, 5.3K. For the trail length, there are examples here again. If you select a max, that's what it's going to look like. If you select a long, that's what it's going to look like. And then if you select short, it's going to look like that. I go with max for these. I find that gives the best results anytime I've used this mode. And the timer, once again, you'll want to do 3 seconds. And the shutter speed of 0.5, I find that does work best for this. I like to keep it right there at the default. And then white balance, I like to put that to 3200K because it is nighttime. And for the ISO min and max, you want to keep those at 100. And the reason is you want the rest of your environment to be dark. You only want it to capture the light painting that you're doing. And the denoise, I recommend keeping that set to high. Vehicle lights is very similar to light painting. And in general, the vehicle lights, I like the default settings that GoPro has in here. But I do like to change it to 8x7, 5.3K and wide, so I have the most flexibility later on. And again, there are examples here. That's if you select short, and if you go all the way up to max, you're going to get something like that. I generally like to keep this set to short. I think that's a great default. Shutter speed of 2 seconds, I also agree that's good. And then all of these other settings I'm going to leave at their defaults. Time-lapse setting, this one is one of my favorite settings to take a look at. This one obviously has a lot of options and a lot of flexibility. If you want to do a video time lapse, so you just have a time lapse you can pull straight out of your camera and share, keep it set to video. But if you do want the raw photos you can work with later on, you want to select photo. And if you do select photo, you'll want to keep it set to wide. And for the output, you'll want to make sure you put it to raw. Raw is going to give you a lot of flexibility when you're editing those photos later on, and it's really the main reason to use the photo mode. And of course, for the interval, you can adjust it here. If you want each frame to be every 3 seconds, you keep it at 3. You can go all the way up to 60 minutes for the interval. If I'm doing a daytime time lapse, I like to keep it at 3 seconds or 5 seconds in general. But 3 is usually my favorite for sunsets and daytime. And the timer, I like to put that to 3 seconds. That way, when I hit the shutter button here, the camera can stop moving before the time lapse starts. And then I like to do EV comp of -0.5 for time lapses. White balance, it's going to depend on time of day. If it's daytime, 5500K. And if it's sunset, 6500K. But I'm going to keep it at 5500K here. And ISO min, I like to keep at 100. And ISO max, I like to keep at 100 as well. I really don't want the variables changing on me during the time lapse as much as possible. I want them to stay static. Sharpness, I like to keep that at low. And denoise, I like to keep that at low as well. And color, for the raw photo mode, I like to keep that at flat. That way I have max control over the colors later on when editing. But if you do video mode, I recommend doing 16:9 because in most cases, you're just going to want to share the video straight out of the camera if you're doing video mode. And then resolution, I definitely recommend 5.3K. Wide is good for the lens. For the interval, you have options from 0.5 of a second all the way up to 60 minutes. Again, I recommend 3 to 5 seconds. And then protein settings, I recommend -0.5. For the white balance, I usually do 5500K if it's during the day. ISO min and max, keep those at 100. Sharpness, keep that at low. And denoise, if you have the ISO set to 100, I recommend putting that down to low. Your footage is going to look best in that case. And then color, if you're going to share it straight out of the camera, I recommend keeping that at natural. And finally, let's take a look at the night lapse mode. So for the night lapse mode, I personally like to do photo. I find that gives the best results because you can bump up that exposure a little bit when editing later on. You can really bring out a lot of those details. But if you want to do video mode, the assumption is you're going to want to share it straight out of your camera. So I would do 16:9, 5.3K wide. It's going to help you capture a good view of the sky. And then for the interval, you want to keep that set to auto because the shutter speed is where we're going to control a lot with that. So if you have a dark sky, I recommend putting the shutter speed at 30 seconds. If you are working with a sky that's in an urban area, or if there's a moon in the sky, you'll generally want to put your shutter speed to about 15 seconds. Timer, I like to keep it at 3 seconds, so when you hit the shutter, your camera's going to be done shaking. And for white balance, I like to do 3200K for a night lapse. And ISO min, I like to put that at 800. And ISO max, I like to have that at 800 as well. And sharpness, I like it at low for night lapse. And denoise, if you're doing a video, I recommend keeping it at high. It's going to smooth it out nicely and make it nice and easy to share. And then color, keep that at natural. But if you're doing photo mode, you'll want to do photo wide. Output, you'll want to put that to raw. Interval, you want to keep it at auto. Shutter, we want to put that up to 30 seconds. Timer, keep that at 3. And then white balance, we want to adjust that down to our 3200. ISO min, we want to put that to 800. And sharpness, we want to put it at low. And denoise, we want to put it to low, because we can work with all those factors later on when editing the photos. And then color, we want to put that to flat. Next, let's talk about the photo best settings. So photo mode, there's several different settings and options in here. There's the main photo, there's the burst photo, there's the night photo. So for the main photo, this is really going to depend on what you're looking for in a photo. If you don't want any distortion, like if you're doing humans or buildings where you don't want anything with the fisheye look, you'll want to select linear. For your output, if you want super photo, which I often recommend, the GoPro is going to fine tune all of the settings and it's going to select accordingly what it thinks will look best. But if you do want an HDR output, you can do HDR. If you want standard, you can do standard. And if you want RAW for max editing later on, you can do RAW. I generally do RAW for the photo mode. And you can do intervals here. So if you want your camera to take a photo every certain amount of time, you can set it here. For the shutter speed, I like to keep this set to auto for photos. For the EV comp, I like to do -0.5. That way it doesn't blow out any of the highlights. For the white balance, I like to keep that set to auto. For the ISO min and max, I like to adjust the max down to 800. And then sharpness, I'll keep that at low. I can always add sharpness later on. And denoise, I'm going to keep that at low as well. And then color, if I'm going to edit later on, I'm going to put that to flat. If I'm not going to edit and I want it straight out of camera, I recommend keeping it at natural. Next, we're going to look at the burst mode. With the burst mode, this basically is going to take several pictures all at once, depending on how you define it. So the settings here, you'll want to set accordingly, including with the output. You can do standard or you can do RAW. I'm going to do RAW. For the burst rate, you can do auto, or you can configure this with a bunch of different settings. You can do 5 in 1 second, 30 in 1 second, 10 in 3 seconds, 60 in 10 seconds. There's a bunch of different options here. So you can choose accordingly depending on what you're looking for that mode. And then Pro Tune down here, it's going to be the same idea. There'll be some settings for you to configure, and I'm going to configure those the same as I would the normal photo mode. And then finally, we have the night photo mode. So this is going to be if you want to take a nighttime photo. For this mode, I do recommend having it on a tripod. It's going to give you the best results. And I like to do wide and output. I'm going to do RAW for nighttime photo, unless you want a photo straight out of your camera to share, in which case you would put it to standard. For the shutter speed, I'm going to keep that auto. For this type of situation where you're not doing a time lapse, it doesn't matter if your shutter speed is changing on you. So I like keeping that at auto, and your camera is going to automatically adjust the shutter speed to get the best static photo. Timer, I definitely recommend keeping that at 3 seconds. That way when you push this, it can stop shaking. And for the EV comp, I recommend keeping that at 0 for a night photo. And the white balance, I recommend 3200K. The ISO min, I recommend 100, and the ISO max, I recommend 800. And for a nighttime photo, if you're just doing a single photo like this, I recommend sharpness medium, and I do recommend denoise high. It's going to give you the best results straight out of the camera. And color, I recommend setting that to natural. And finally, 2 additional tips that I want to go over with you. One of them relates to battery life. So if you want to maximize battery life on your GoPro, here's some things you can do. You can, of course, use the screensaver, which we already talked about in settings. You can lower the screen brightness as well. You can turn off the front screen. So if you're not using the front screen at all, you can turn it off. That's going to save battery. You also can turn off the wireless connection. So if you don't need to wirelessly connect to your camera to control it via your phone, you can turn that off. If you're not using GPS, you can turn off GPS, and you also can choose a shorter auto power off setting. In addition, of course, you can capture video at a lower frame rate and lower resolution, and that's going to save you battery as well. But I don't recommend making that trade-off unless you're in a really desperate situation where you need to. I do recommend having an external power bank like this one right here that you can easily power this with, or getting some extra batteries is also a good option. And one other tip I wanted to mention here is tips for keeping your GoPro cooler. Now, one thing that GoPro did add with the Hero 13 is that heatsink on the front that appears to have better ventilation and ability to keep this camera cooler than some of the prior GoPros. If overheating is a problem, the first thing you can do is try recording several shorter clips. Don't just have your GoPro rolling continuously for one single long clip. That can really cause a lot of heat in here because it is recording very high quality footage. So if you do several shorter clips, and then put those clips together to tell your story. It's going to help your GoPro run coolest. Also, having your GoPro paired with the Quik app can generate a lot of heat as well. So if you don't have to have it paired to the Quik app while you're using it, I recommend not doing so, because that's going to create a lot of unnecessary heat. It's better if you use the remote from GoPro. It's sold separately, of course, but if you use that, it's going to create less heat than the Quik app will.